The movie opens as author Crockett Johnson tells us about his creation, a boy named Harold who has a magic purple crayon. Harold can draw whatever he wants, and it immediately comes to life. The kid draws himself two friends, Moose and Porcupine, and from this point onwards, they will always be close to each other. Just as Harold becomes an adult, his world continues to become bigger, and that's not just because of what he drew himself in his pants. And his imagination keeps on expanding, as do his pants. One random day, Harold begins to question his existence and wonders who drew him. The narrator doesn't reveal his name, but promptly replies that Harold is his creation. He adds that he lives in the real world, where things are much more complicated. Harold is curious to know more about this world, and exclaims that it must be a wonderful place to live in. However, the narrator doesn't say much before leaving his creations for the night. The next morning, a curious Harold has a long list of questions concerning the real world. He begins to blurt out these queries, but the narrator doesn't reply at all. Harold thus decides to go to the real world to find the narrator, who he calls the Old Man. He uses his crayon to draw a door that creates a portal to the next dimension. Harold, Moose, and Porcupine are all amazed by the color emanating through the door. He then decides to go through, but Moose is hesitant because the Old Man warned that the real world is much more complicated. Nonetheless, Harold tells his friends to stay in case the Old Man comes back, and then jumps into the portal. He zooms through a colorful space before landing in Rhode Island as a real human. Harold is instantly taken aback by the colorful view and how everything is in 3 dimensions. Meanwhile, Porcupine tricks Moose into having a peek at the other side of the door. She then uses her quill to poke him in the backside, essentially pushing him all the way through the door. Moose turns into a human and soon lands on Rhode Island, but Porcupine is left behind. On the other hand, Harold figures out that the people of the real world can't relate with him because of his clothes. He goes over to a nearby clothing donation booth and changes into a used pair of overalls. This is when Moose also shows up, and the two friends take a moment to enjoy how beautiful the real world is. They look around and suddenly spot an elderly man sitting on a bench. Immediately they rush over to the spot, thinking they are about to meet their supposed creator. But the old man has never seen these two guys before and tells them to bugger off. Unfazed by the incident, Harold draws a bicycle using his purple crayon and brings it to life. The two friends then head out of the Elsewhere, Porcupine also manages to open the portal after a bit of struggle. She soon lands in the same park in Rhode Island, having transformed into a human. Meanwhile, Harold rides his bike carelessly on the road and almost hits a car carrying a mother, Terry, and her young son, Mel. She manages to swerve just in time, but the car smashes into the sidewalk. Terry quickly comes down to check if the strangers were hit by their vehicle. Thankfully, no one is hurt, except for Harold, who has a small cut on his thumb. Terry attends to his injury and then discovers that she has a flat tire. While she is busy calling for help on her phone, Harold quickly draws a spare tire. Mel, who just saw the stranger conjure up a tire from thin air, is left speechless. He thus comes out and quickly introduces himself to the two men. The strangers fix up the car and Terry offers to drop them at their destination. However, it quickly becomes clear that neither Harold nor Moose knows where exactly they want to go. They do not have a place to stay, and the only thing they know is that they are here to see their old man. Mel thus pleads with his mother to let them stay at their house for the night, and she reluctantly agrees. Sometime later, they arrive at their destination, and Terry shows the strangers their room. Harold discovers that Terry is a musician, but she tells him that it was just a childhood dream. She left music long ago and now works at a store as a floor assistant. Later that night, while Moose sleeps, Harold gets to have a conversation with Mel. The kid shows off his drawings and talks about his imaginary pet, a flying lizard named Carl. Mel goes on to reveal about the tragic demise of his father and how his mom hasn't really been herself since his death. He promises to help find the old man if Harold can help make his mom happy again. Sounds like 2 for the price of 1 to me, kiddo, says Harold. As the two form a friendship, Harold shows how he was able to bring out the tire using his magic crayon. He even lets Mel draw with the crayon, and the kid draws a spider fly, a creature that has the body of a spider but wings like a fly, a proper eldritch nightmare. In the meantime, Porcupine goes on around the city looking for Harold. She can smell his scent and seems seems to be on the right path to find her friends. Her search, however, is quickly interrupted when she gets distracted by a house with purple flowers. Thinking that Harold is leaving her some clues, she ends up breaking into the house. Porcupine makes herself comfortable by eating a pie from the kitchen, but then the alarms go off. She runs away after hearing the loud blaring noises, just as the house owner calls the cops. The following morning, Terry asks the strangers to leave, pointing out that she has to go to work. Harold promptly agrees and gives half of his magic crayon to Mel before leaving, but the kid follows the two in search of the old man and takes a long route to school. While walking across the neighborhood, Harold comes across a pamphlet advertising the local library as the place where you can learn about anything. Mel then takes them to the biggest library in town, hoping to gather some information that may help find the old man. After some time, the trio finally reaches their destination, where they find Gary Natwick, the librarian and a failed fantasy writer. He is having a reading session with people who aren't really interested in his book. Harold soon finds out that the main heroine in Gary's novel looks awfully similar to Terry. It is obvious that the librarian has a crush on her, a fact that he tries to hide from Mel. However, the kid is aware of this and even uses it to coerce Gary into assisting Harold. The librarian promises to help, but makes it clear that he is only doing so because he respects Terry. Unfortunately, Harold only knows that his creator is called the Old Man and is a very kind person. Gary scoffs and sarcastically says that the only way they can find him is by flying up a sign in the sky. Harold, who comes from a universe where everything is possible, thanks the librarian for this brilliant idea. Following this, the trio heads to the parking lot where Harold uses his crayon to draw a plane. When Gary sees this, he immediately realizes where the two strangers have come from, but before he can interfere, the three friends take to the skies in their brand new aeroplane. They leave a message for the old man in the sky, asking him to call them, but the number they have left behind belongs to Terry, and her phone immediately begins to explode with hundreds of calls.
I'm old sugar, but I age like brandy.
Shortly afterwards, Mel then goes to school, but while he tries to sneak in, he's stopped by two bullies. They try to steal his whistle, the one he wears around his neck to call his imaginary pet Carl, but the kid isn't going to let that happen, and he elbows one of the bullies in the face, giving him a bloody nose. The commotion only stops when a teacher intervenes and sends them to the principal's office. On the other hand, Harold and Moose go over to Ollie's, the superstore where Terry works. They are amazed by how big it is as they go through the items. Moments later, Terry sees Harold and Moose enjoying the massage chair at the retail store. She expresses her irritation that so many elderly men are calling her. Just then, Terry gets yet another phone call, but this time from the school principal, who informs her that Mel has gotten into trouble. Realizing that Terry needs to immediately head out, Harold and Moose volunteer to fill in for her. Things don't go according to plan though, as barely 6 minutes into the retail job, Harold and Moose begin questioning the concept of working. This kid's movie just got dark. Meanwhile, Terry fetches Mel from school and tells him that he needs to let go of Carl and start making real friends. The kid tries to make her see that he is friends with Harold, but Mom doesn't like that idea. She fears Harold will fill her son's head with magic conspiracies. Back at Ollie's, Moose gets distracted by a large TV screen that is currently playing a nature documentary. Harold, on the other hand, uses his magic crayon to draw a live puma after a customer comes looking for the shoe brand. The entire store slips into chaos. Multiple shelves fall down. There is a fire going on, and a few shoppers are even injured. When Terry eventually comes back, she is fired from her already soul-crushing job. But in a surprise twist, she agrees to let the two strangers stay a little longer, as she is happy that they trashed the stupid store. I didn't like having a grown man around my son, but now that I know you're a criminal. That evening, all of them head downtown, where Terry reveals after her husband's death. Mel drags his mother for ice cream, and using this opportunity, Harold conjures up a grand piano right in the center of the town. He then convinces Terry to let the past go, and she eventually plays a beautiful tune, captivating a huge crowd of onlookers. Meanwhile, Porcupine goes to a diner in search of Harold, but due to her lack of social skills, she ends up causing a scene. She is chased by two police officers who have been after her ever since she broke into that house a few days ago. In the meantime, time, Gary arrives downtown and is now fully aware that Harold and Moose came from another dimension. He praises Terry for her beautiful performance, despite having not witnessed it. He then asks to speak privately with the strangers, while Terry takes her son home. After a while, Gary tells Harold and Moose that their world is inside a book titled Harold and the Purple Crayon. He wants to know how they managed to come to Rhode Island. Their conversation, though, is abruptly cut short when Porcupine bumps into her old friends, but she's then immediately tackled to the ground by a cop. The police also realize that Harold and Moose are close allies with the suspect, and soon all three of them are arrested. However, the police are unable to keep them locked up for long, as Harold uses his crayon to draw a giant wrecking ball. They quickly break the station's wall and manage to escape from their prison cell. At school, Mel sees the trio from his window and rushes to meet them, but he's stopped by the bullies, who take his whistle and lock him in a closet. Just when all hope seems to be lost, Mel remembers the broken piece of crayon that Harold had given him. How'd he forget about that? He immediately uses it to bring his imaginary pet Carl to life, and the flying lizard bursts out of the closet. It frightens the life out of the bullies and helps Mel escape. Moments later, the kid meets up with his friends, who tell him about the book that they came from. Mel recognizes the author, Crockett Johnson, and offers to take them to his house, which is barely 20 minutes away. What child knows strangers' addresses like that? Porcupine then takes the wheel, and they immediately set off. When the group arrives at Johnson's house, they meet Mrs. Barnaby, the caretaker. She unfortunately reveals that Johnson has passed away, and that the house is now a museum, showcasing his artwork. Just then, Terry shows up at the spot and reprimands Harold for interfering in their lives. She accuses him of turning things upside down and asks him to stay away from her son. Following this, a depressed Harold feels like everything has been a waste of time. His spirit begins to wane, which causes everything he has drawn, including Moose and Porcupine, to vanish. Unbeknownst to him, things are about to get even worse, as Gary soon finds him. The librarian takes Harold to his home and tricks him into handing over the purple crayon. Gary then shows his true colors by imprisoning Harold and vows revenge on the world that rejected him. Meanwhile, Terry and Mel are returning home when suddenly a tire from their car vanishes into thin air. This makes the kid realize that something bad is going to happen soon. He thus runs away to the library, guessing that Harold must have come to Gary for help. Unfortunately, the kid is also captured and put in handcuffs by the librarian. Gary then creates a chariot and heads into town, determined to create his new world. Meanwhile, Harold feels like a failure, but Mel says that he has brought joy into the lives of several people. The kid then takes out his broken piece of crayon and uses it to draw a key, freeing both of them from their shackles. Soon afterwards, Harold tracks down Gary and calmly tells him to give the crayon back. In a shocking twist of events, the librarian swallows Harold's crayon and transforms into a powerful entity who can create things out of thin air. Despite all the problems, Harold is in high spirits and optimistic about saving the world. This causes Moose and Porcupine to rematerialize, along with Mel's pets, Carl and the Spiderfly. The latter two then work as a team and end up retrieving the swallowed crayon, stripping Gary of his power and dismantling his creations. In the aftermath of this event, the group visits the Johnson Museum to learn about Harold's origins. Miss Barnaby shows him a room where Johnson left a special note for him. It encourages Harold to maintain his confidence and continue inspiring others. After saying goodbye to Terry and Mel, Harold, Moose, and Porcupine return to their world. They are now equipped with crayons of